Welcome to the complete animation of Jewel from Blue Sky Animation Studios' 2011 animated film Rio. Rio is a really interesting movie in just how it does its main characters. I don't think that there are very many just movies about birds that are so close to just real birds. I mean, you have movies like Happy Feet, which where it basically is entire bird society, but then it goes into this weird like film footage alternate reality with humans in it. And then you have movies like Don Bluth's The Pebble and the Penguin, which is also about penguins. And you also have Sony Pictures Animation's Surf's Up, which is also about penguins. And I heard a rumor, nothing substantiated, but I heard that Rio was also going to be a penguin movie. But then they decided to not do yet another penguin movie because there were so many penguin movies. So I don't know if if what I heard is substantiated or not, but it makes for an interesting little story. But yeah, so Rio. One of the things that I like the most about Rio is just how colorful it is. It is so vibrant. Remember, this came out in 2011, and if you remember what media was doing around 2011, this was the peak of games like, Call of Duty and Gears of War, and there were just so many movies, video games that insisted on having this absolutely disgusting color palette everywhere. It's like, oh, if you smear everything in brown, that makes it gritty and more, realistic. But then sometimes you get something that's a little different. And thank goodness animation, that is quote unquote for kids, did not fall for that trap, because bright, vibrant, colorful, that will always stand the test of time. Like, you go back, you look at Call of Duty 4, Modern Warfare, which was, one of the pieces of media to kick off that entire era of desaturated brown coloring, and like, you can't even tell what's happening. Like, it is all just the same color. But Rio is so colorful. The main characters are just these bright blue birds. Really good. I think that one of my favorite things about Rio is just the character animation. If you look at, especially Blue, the opening sequence where Blue is sort of like helping around the house has some of the most incredible like character animation I've ever seen. Like, I honestly think that this was one of those movies where they must have animated that last, because it's just so good. Like, everybody knows the story of how Into the Spider-Verse, they decided to animate the very opening sequence of the movie last. And they did that on purpose because they wanted to show off, like, this is us at the end of our production cycle. This is us with the best grasp of this art style and this workflow. We want to show off, the best that we have at the very beginning. And so they did that. And I wouldn't be surprised if they did that with the opening sequence. Because when Blue is just walking around the house doing all of these things that a bird could do without flying, it's so good. And I honestly think that Blue has the best character animation in this movie because like it felt like the animators were challenging themselves to show off a bird being incredibly competent at, getting around and getting stuff done, but without flying. And just the way that Blue walks around and uses his feet for everything, it just is visually so appealing. And to a lesser extent, Jewel also does a whole bunch of that stuff. I think that just the birds hanging on to stuff and like doing stuff with their feet is just some of the best bits of character animation. It's so appealing. And speaking of appeal, look at these character designs. It's like thinking about the other, major bird movies, which for some reason are penguin movies. You look at the way they designed their female characters. Look at Happy Feet. Holy cow. Like, in what world did they decide that basically giving the female penguin's cleavage was the best way to show off, sexual dichotomy? Dimorphism? Dimorphism, not dichotomy. What am I talking about? Anyway, so basically it's just there are some animals where females and males look a lot different. And birds aren't really like that, like besides like the obvious big ones where they have different plumage, where oftentimes the male birds have like really colorful plumage, like mallard ducks. Besides that, like they kind of look the same. And a bunch of birds that are already really colorful, like parrots or other tropical birds, like they're all really colorful, so you can't really tell males or females apart just by looking at them. But obviously, in an animated movie like this, where things are a bit more cartoonized, they had to find some way to make Jewel look feminine. But the art style, like, basically called for realistic looking birds that still had realistic features, even though they had, some liberties here and there for more cartoony proportions. And I think they did a really good job. Like, the birds here look really realistic in everywhere except for the face. They've got really big expressive eyes, which, fair enough for an animated movie. And they have beaks that move way too much. Like, actual bird beaks are the most static, like, non-expressive thing ever. But in this movie, to top with that, they really went to town with the beaks being able to move, especially the lower beak and around the dimple area. Just really expressive. But one of the things that I do appreciate is they did not give the birds teeth. It's like, fair enough if you want to give birds teeth. Like, sometimes it works. Sometimes it looks a little off. I'm thinking of the 2016 film, Storks. That movie, like, really went all in giving the birds teeth. And it's like, giving birds teeth in animation is one of those things where, in the moment, while it's happening, it often works. The birds have teeth when they really smile, and then they sort of, like, disappear. Like, the magically appearing and reappearing teeth. But even though it works in the moment, the second you actually start to think about it and, look at it frame by frame, is like when the teeth are there and when they're not, it starts to be a little weird. And so I do appreciate Rio being a little bit more consistent and just not having teeth at all. Like, the birds just don't have teeth. They have other ways of making the birds emote. And another thing that they did is they really went subtle on giving the birds hands at the ends of their wings. It's like there are some, sort of bird designs where their wings really are hands. It's like they can do hand things as well as any, human character. I'm thinking of the rooster minstrel bard type character from Disney's Robin Hood. He's literally just playing a banjo or guitar or whatever with his wings that are also hands. But then you go all the way to absolutely non-anthropomorphized birds, and they don't use their wings for anything but flapping. It's like really, I guess sometimes they use their wings to cover something. They can, sometimes hens will spread their wings out to cover their chicks, or I think there are some eagles who cover their food with their wings while they're eating. But besides that, they don't really use their wings for anything but flapping. I guess there is those tropical birds who use their wings as part of their mating display. But here in Rio, I think they did a really good job of splitting the difference between having realistic wings and how they're used, and then just ever so slightly using the wings for emotive purposes, and very seldomly actually using the wings for to grasp stuff. I think that they did a really good job with basically striking the perfect balance between having realistic birds doing realistic bird things and also cartoon characters that are expressive and emotive and talkative. Yeah, I think that Rio did a really good job. Visually, Rio it still holds up for the most part. I think the most impressive part is the feathers. The feathers look good. I think that the animators spent a lot of time making sure that feathers would work and would also have a bit of procedural animation, because I don't think that you would want to hand key each and every feather. And yeah, I just really like the visuals of Rio. The places where the visuals are kind of don't hold up quite as well to what is coming out nowadays has to be the lighting. There are a bunch of scenes where everything just looks kind of flat, as if the dynamic lights didn't really hit on there, especially in the bright sunny day. It's bright sunny day where it's a clear sky and the sun is beating straight down. That is one of that's one of the places in 3D animation that really don't lend themselves to looking right. Thinking about the original Toy Story, the first animated movie, it really didn't do a good job of just making the lighting not look so flat in those types of scenes. But here in this scene, where it's an indoor scene with, direct stylized light, I think it looks pretty good. And I guess I need to rewatch the second movie as well sometime, because I remember thinking that the visuals were the technical parts of the visuals were better in the sequel, but I also distinctly remember thinking that the actual character animation was less good. It was a movie that looked better on a technical level, but in terms of actual animation, wasn't as good. Yeah. There are these characters that are like other birds. I think that the characters were mostly invented to have some famous people that I never heard of before play them. Like the little yellow bird who wears a bottle cap as a hat. I think his voice actor is famous, but his character I think is just okay. One of the things I do really like about this movie is how it's, you know, it's a movie called Rio, and it takes place in Rio de Janeiro. It's an actual city. I think that the movie lives up to its name. It really is a movie that wants to sort of be a love letter to the city. Like, and it doesn't just show, the nice stuff. It also goes into the shantytown parts. It's pretty realistic, but it also shows that life in that shantytown, isn't the worst thing ever. Like, while they're escaping through the shantytown, it shows a little scene where, there's just a few people just watching the local football match. It's like they were having a good time. Sure, they don't live in the most ostentatious of houses, but they enjoy it. So I think that's one of the things that I like about that. Like that particular scene there, just showing that even if you're not rich or wealthy, you can still, like life can still have its simple pleasures. Now, the big thing about this movie and its characters is the relationship between Blue and Jewel. It it's I don't know how realistic it is. I think I'm probably one of the least qualified to comment about, romance and that sort of a relationship. But I think that the relationship works well, pretty well. One thing that I didn't know until rewatching this movie for this complete animation is that Jewel is voiced by Anne Hathaway. Like, I guess that kind of makes sense because back when this movie came out, Anne Hathaway was more of a well-known actress. I think she's still pretty well known now, but especially around this time, she was hitting a peak in her career. But I think that like she's sort of diminished in relevance. Nothing wrong with that. It just happens. And like I guess this is one of those instances where the the it just works. Like it's a famous actress who gets a voice role probably because they're famous, but then they actually like nail the role. I'm thinking of Kevin Bacon in Balto. He like really sold that role. And yeah, one of the things that I do like about Rio 2 is that it's a full theatrical, full budget sequel. I do think I prefer this day and age where animated sequels are full budget theatrical releases. Like I'll be the first one to say that a bunch of the Disney and other like straight to video animated sequels, that there are some of them that are really good, that punch above their weight in terms of visuals and storytelling. But then there are a bunch that aren't good. And I think that I would much rather prefer quality over quantity here. Where, yeah. And speaking of sequels, like, we ever gonna see a Rio 3? Like, some people think that it could be good. Some people think that it could be better than the second one. And, like the having a full budget sequel with, all of the even more modern technology could work well. But at the same time, Blue Sky Studios got shut down. So, I don't think that, the new parent company Disney would really be interested in it. And yeah, who knows? So this bit right here, like this scene, these night scenes, I think have more appealing lighting than many of the broad daylight scenes. And indoor lighting, I think does a pretty good job, where you've got, very specific close light sources that um, allow for, just some pretty good shadows and self shadows. Yeah. I really like, I said it before and I'll say it again. I really like how they made Jewel a female. And it's like there's basically nothing in her body that shows that she's a female, unless you compare her side by side with Blue, where she has she's a little softer, a little more slender, and so all they did to make her female is all in the face. It's all in how they changed her beak shape to be a little more feminine-ish than Blue's, and then the big one is the eyes. And they didn't do it by giving her super long eyelashes. Her eyelashes are barely even noticeable. They're, yeah. And then just the eye shape. It's interesting. So one of the reasons why I think a bunch of people really gravitate towards Rio in its storytelling is because there are just a lot of people who really just appreciate the idea of a character like Blue, who's, kind of a dork, a nerd, a dweeb, sort of that. A character like him managing to find a successful relationship. It's a storyline that, when it's done well, I can see resonating with a lot of people like me. I mean, what kind of guy who makes videos about the animation of cartoon characters and tries to have meaningful discussions about them? What kind of guy like me wouldn't relate to that to at least some level? And I think that, when it works, it's pretty appealing. I'm thinking of Hiccup from the How to Train Your Dragon movies. He, in many ways, is a lot like Blue, and the fact that he was able to get a successful relationship means a lot. Although I think that his relationship with Astrid makes a whole lot more sense. It takes place over years, whereas in this movie, it takes place over just one movie. But yeah, so Blue Sky's Rio. I'm glad that Blue Sky was able to make as many movies as they did when they did. And I hope that their legacy is a positive one. Thanks for watching.